Hey, RetconRaider here. Today I thought we'd take a quick look at another upcoming project that recently caught my eye. Today I thought we'd talk about Forged of Blood by Critical Forge. So what is Forged of Blood? Well, from what we've seen so far, it's a turn-based tactical game that takes place in a fantasy setting, with a heavy focus on making meaningful narrative decisions as you progress through the main story. Forged of Blood takes place in Adoras, a hard fantasy setting in which the world has essentially been conquered by a hybrid race known as the Neshalon. From an inspirational standpoint, it's a setting where civilized regions are visually inspired by the ancient Roman Empire, and the wilderness is more reminiscent of gorgeous high fantasy settings. But it's also a world where humanity shares the landscape with strange and terrifying beasts, and magic is only possible with the assistance of Magorite, a strange material harvested from interdimensional creatures known as the Bracati. Although details are scarce, it appears that the player will take on the role of brothers who were once part of a ruling family. Forced into exile by their foes, the player will be tasked with working towards gathering allies and eventually retaking their kingdom. And this, of course, leads into the main focus of the game: the turn-based tactical combat system. At its most basic, Forged of Blood appears to be inspired by a system not unlike Dungeons & Dragons, with each character receiving 3 actions per turn: a standard action, a movement action, and a quick action. Standard actions are used for things like attacking or casting spells, while movement actions are used to move across the battlefield, and quick actions are used for simple things like retrieving items from your inventory, or using various utility skills. And, like most conventional turn-based tactical games, Forged of Blood will make use of things like a directional cover system, elevation modifiers, choke points, and character-facing modifiers, all intended to add to the tactical complexity of your average skirmish. But the game will be granted even more depth through the use of a classless character system that encourages the player to try finding different combinations of equipment, skills, and even magic. The developers are planning to include 9 different weapon-based skill trees, as well as 6 general ability trees, to allow the players to customize their soldiers to their likings. Characters will be able to wield up to 2 weapon sets at a time, chosen from a selection of 9 weapon categories, with individual weapons being further modified by things like quality, material, and enchantments. Different weapons will, of course, serve different tactical functions on the battlefield, including things like quick and versatile daggers, your conventional sword and board, short and long-range bows, and massive 2-handed weapons. And then there's the magic. Magic in Forged of Blood is designed to be highly customizable, with the player essentially crafting their own spells using the game's Magorite system. The player can use this system to decide many of the details about how their spells will work, including adjusting things like range, power, duration, and the intended area of effect. The system they've laid out sounds surprisingly complex, allowing the player to come up with some rather cunning spell combinations, such as charging a living target with energy, teleporting it into the midst of an enemy formation, and then explosively discharging that energy. Similarly, the player will be able to use magic for other interesting spell synergies, such as drawing heat away from one target, effectively slowing or even freezing it solid, and then repurposing that captured heat into a flame-based attack against another group of foes. But as fascinating as that all sounds, Forged of Blood looks rather promising in other areas as well. Outside of combat, the player will also contend with a sprawling strategic layer. Here, the player will be able to control up to 3 parties at a time, moving them around the map to take on quests, capture territories, and gather resources to help in retaking their kingdom. At a certain point in the story, the player will even gain access to their own castle, which will allow them to do things like crafting and researching, and which can be upgraded over time with a variety of different structures. And then, of course, there's the story. As I mentioned before, Forged of Blood is being designed with player agency in mind. The player is intended to be regularly confronted with important narrative decisions as they progress through the campaign. Will the player seek out the assistance of a rebel faction, or crush them mercilessly under his heel? Will the player spare an enemy in hopes that they might be redeemed, or brutally execute them as an example to others? Decisions like these will have consequences, both in tactical battles and on the overarching strategy layer. But it's important to remember that Adoras is a world of moral ambiguity, a world where it's not always easy to tell whether something might be good or evil. To reflect this, the player's actions will be tracked using the game's unique tri-axis personality plot system. The player's decisions will influence their character's overall personality and reputation, pushing or pulling it towards the extremes of empathy, hedonism, or wisdom. Critical Forge is a relatively new development studio based out of Jakarta, Indonesia. They've been working on Forged of Blood for roughly 18 months now, and they're tentatively planning to try for a full release on the PC platform sometime in early 2018, possibly around June. Now, of course, it's worth keeping in mind that this prospective release date was originally pitched back during the original crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter, a campaign which, unfortunately, never gained much traction. But despite not reaching their funding goal, the developers have continued working on the game at a truly impressive rate, with almost monthly development updates on their official website. Personally, I'm glad to see that the developers stuck with it, because I think Forged of Blood looks like it can end up being another great tactical game for 2018, which, honestly, is starting to look like it might be a year filled to overflowing with great turn-based tactical titles. So you can be sure that I'll be keeping a close eye on Forged of Blood over the coming months. But for now, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Forged of Blood, you can find out more about the game by visiting the official website, or you can check out the trailers and gameplay teasers over on the official YouTube channel. Links are in the description.